Today we're going to be talking about solving one-step equations. And the key to solving equations is remembering that every operation has an opposite operation. The opposite of addition is subtraction. The opposite of subtraction is addition. The opposite of multiplication is division. And the opposite of division is multiplication. The definition of an equation is an equation is something that states that two expressions are equal. Now going back to this idea of opposite operations, we're going to be using the addition property of equality, which says if two expressions are equal and you add the same number to each side, the two sides will still be equal, and that's the addition property of equality. So in other words, if you add something to one side, you have to add the same thing to the other side. Similarly, the subtraction property of equality says if two expressions are equal and you subtract the same number from each side, then the two sides will still be equal. So it's the same idea. Whatever you do to one side of an equation, you have to do to the other. Okay, so for example, let's say that we have this equation here. N minus 3.2 equals 5.6. I like to just draw a line right down through the equal sign. It separates one side of the equation from the other. And what we're going to do, because we want to isolate the n, we want to get the variable alone. So we notice that 3.2 is being subtracted from n. So we're going to do the opposite and add 3.2 to each side. So the 3.2's cancel, and you're left with n equals, and now we actually do the addition. 5.6 plus 3.2 gives you 8.8. And the way you check this is you take your original equation, n minus 3.2 equals 5.6, and you plug your answer in place of the n. So you're going to have 8.8 minus 3.2. And does that indeed equal 5.6? And yes, it does. So you're just going to plug your number in and make sure that the problem does work out to the answer that was given. So we're not going to check every single one of these, but that's how it's done. Let's go ahead and look at the next problem here. We've got negative 6 equals k minus 6. You want to get k alone. So instead of the subtracting 6, which you see here, and I forgot to draw the line down through the equal sign, you're going to add 6 to each side, just so that the minus 6 will cancel on the same side as the k. So they cancel out, and we have k equals, what's negative 6 plus 6? That is 0. Okay? So here's one that you could try on your own. See what you get. 16 equals m minus 9. Let's go down to this one here. We have 5/16 equals z minus 7/16. Don't let the fractions intimidate you. Let's add 7/16 to each side in order to get z alone. So the negative 7/16 and the positive 7/16, they cancel out. And we're left with 5/16 plus 7/16 gives you 12/16. Remember, when the denominators are the same, you keep them. So 12/16 is the answer, but can we reduce 12/16? Is there a number that will divide into both 12 and 16? Yes, that would be 4. So if we divide each by 4, so this is reaching back to when you learn fractions. 12 divided by 4 gives you 3. 16 divided by 4 gives you 4. So your answer is 3/4. Let's continue on to the next page. And here we are given negative 5 equals k plus 5. So keep in mind, we want to get k alone. So draw a line down through the equal side. Equal sign 5 is being added to k, so you are going to do the opposite and subtract 5 from each side. So we end up with negative 10 equals k because the negative 5 and positive 5 cancel out. Next we have negative 2.3 plus m equals 7. Look at here, we have this m, and then we have a negative 2.3. What you might not think of that as subtracting, but it really is the same as saying m minus 2.3. So what we're going to do instead of having this negative or minus 2.3, we're just going to add 2.3 to each side. I can erase that mark. And by doing that, the 2.3's cancel, and we have m equals 7 plus 2.3 will give us 9.3. So let's go on to the next page. We have a word problem. Over 20 years, the population of a town decreased by 275 people to a population of 850. Write and solve an equation to find the original population. So, in other words, let's just say that our original population is P. All right, so if we took the original population and it tells us this population decreased by 275, well, if it decreased, that means that we're going to subtract 275. And then the result was a population of 850, so that is equal to 850. So we've created this equation, and now we want to get P alone. So we'll add 275 to each side. So the 275's cancel, and we have P equals, let's see, 5 and 0 is 5, 5 and 7 is 12, carry the 1. I was premature in writing down my 1 here, but 1 and 8 is 9, and 9 and 2 is 11. So here we go. So the population is 1,125. That was your original population. Now we can also solve equations by multiplying or dividing, and we're going to use the multiplication property of equality, which says if two expressions are equal and you multiply each side by the same number, the two sides will still be equal. So if you multiply on one side, you do it on the other side too. The division property of equality states if two expressions are equal and you divide each side by the same number, the two sides will still be equal. So in other words, if you divide on one side of the equation, you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So for instance, in this first equation, let's say we have p over 5 equals 10. We want to get p alone, and look and see what's happening. P is being divided by 5. The opposite of dividing by 5 is multiplying by 5. So we're going to multiply each side by 5. The 5's will cancel, and so we get p by itself, and 10 times 5 equals 50. If we check this equation, that means we're just going to take the original equation, p over 5 equals 10, and put the 50 in place of the 5. And 50 over 5 does indeed equal 10. So that checks out. Now, we're going to have to remember what we know about fractions here. We have negative 56w equals negative 20. Well, we'll draw our line through the equal sign. Negative 56 is multiplying the w. So we want to do the opposite of multiplying by negative 56, which means we're going to divide by negative 56. Now remember, when you multiply by when you divide by a fraction, you flip the fraction over and multiply. That's called taking the reciprocal of the fraction, or multiplying by the reciprocal. So here we have this negative 5 6. What we're going to do is turn it upside down, so we have negative 6 fifths. And we're going to multiply each side by that reciprocal. Now the negative 6's, or the 6's cancel, and the 5's cancel. Remember, a negative times a negative gives you a positive, so we just end up with W here, positive W. Now here on the right hand side, we have to put negative 20 over 1, and let's just go ahead and multiply right across. We're going to say negative 20 times negative 6 is positive 120, and 1 times 5 is 5. So we have 120 divided by 5, which gives us 24. Let's do this again. We have negative 1/4 equals 1/5 b. We want to get b by itself. So let's multiply by, because normally we would take and we'd say 1/5 is multiplying the b. So so that means we'd like to divide by 1/5. When you divide by 1/5, it means that you flip over the fraction and multiply. Multiply by the reciprocal. That's what that's called. So the 5's will cancel, the 1's will cancel, and we're left with b equals, so let's go ahead and multiply across. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5, and 1 times 4 is 4. That's supposed to be a 4, so in other words, we have b equals negative 5/4. On this one, we have 4j over 6 equals 2/3. We can rewrite that. That's the same thing as having 4/6j equals 2/3. Believe it or not, that's the same thing. And so what I'd like you to do now is think about what your next step is going to be. Since we are multiplying by a fraction, we want to do the opposite and divide by it, which means we're multiplying by the reciprocal. So we're going to multiply each side by 6/4. The 6's will cancel, and so will the 4's. If we multiply across, we have 2 times 6 is 12, and 3 times 4 is also 12. Well, 12 divided by 12 just gives you 1, so j is 1. Now here are some that don't involve fractions. So let's say we have 9 times y equals 108. We want to get y alone, and the 9 is multiplying the y, so we're going to do the opposite and divide each side by 9. The 9's will cancel, and we have y equals 108 divided by 9, so y is 12. I'd like you to try the next one. Let's move on to the next page. Tim puts 1/4 of the money he earns from lawn mowing into a college education fund. This year, Tim added $285 to his college education fund. Write and solve an equation to find how much money Tim earned mowing lawns this year. It should say how much money. Okay, so let's say that we say M is the money earned. Okay, so he puts 1/4 of that money into his college education fund. So if we took 1/4 of the money earned, that would be the same thing as saying 1/4 times M. And we know that the amount that he put into his college education fund was $285. So now let's solve that. Remember that if you are multiplying by a fraction, to get rid of it, to get rid of that fraction in front of the variable, multiply by the reciprocal on each side. So the 4's will cancel on the left. And we have 285 equals 4 over 1. Let's put a 1 underneath the 285 so we can multiply right across. We end up with $1,140. So that was how much he earned mowing lawns this year. Thank you very much.